Macy took a deep breath as the cool ocean breeze caressed her skin. She could feel the waves breaking on her legs while the sound of seabirds flew overhead. She could hear the dense jungle beyond the beach swaying in the wind. For a moment she felt relaxed, as if everything was right with the world. Unfortunately, the reality was that she was in a simulation. Everything that touched her 5 senses was all just in her mind. But in this moment, as she looked out over the sea in front of her, everything was right with the world. Suddenly, a voice crept into her mind. "Hello again, Dr. Jensen." Macy turned around to find Nima smiling at her. The philologist returned the expression, but with a hint of curiosity. "Hello, Nima. I have some questions for you." "Understood. I must remind you, however, that I was not programmed to answer most of your questions, as I am simply a messenger." "Yeah, okay. But let's try anyway. Can you translate vision the same way you translate what we're saying?" "If you are asking if I can translate our written language to your written language, then the answer is yes." "Wonderful. Take us to the laboratory you created Biollante, would you?" Nima smiled at Macy. Then in the blink of an eye, they were in Nima's laboratory where she had created the abomination that doomed her people. Nima watched as Macy walked around the room looking for anything with writing on it. When Macy reached what she assumed was Nima's desk, she felt Nima's voice flow into her mind. "Initiating translation protocols. It will only be a moment before the translation process is completed." Macy glanced back at Nima and smiled before resuming her search. And that's when she found it. A tomb with the simple title, "Before the Gods." She could feel her pulse rising with excitement as she reached down to pick up the tomb. But to her dismay, she could not. Every time she tried, her hand just passed through it as if it wasn't there. "Apologies, Dr. Jensen. You cannot manipulate the data stored within the simulation." Macy crossed her arms in frustration. Then a new question came to her mind as she turned to ask Nima. "Can you tell me what the contents of this tomb is?" "All I can tell you is that the tomb tells the story of how the Titans shaped our world and how they protected it from the heavens before their children defeated them and began their reign." "Elaborate, please. What do you mean, how they protected the world from the heavens?" Macy watched as Nima's head began to jerk, as if she was following a small insect's flight path. Then suddenly she stopped and stared at Macy. "Apologies, Dr. Jensen, but there appears to be no more data on this subject. Are there any more queries?" Macy looked down for a moment, lost in thought. With a new question on the edge of her mind, she approached the avatar of Nima. "Is it possible to add data to the cephalon?" "Yes, it is. To add data, all one must do is freely share a memory or memories." "What do you mean by freely?" "In accordance with one's will. The cephalon cannot forcibly extract memories as a precaution, so as to not be used as a weapon." Macy smiled at Nima. She glanced around the room one last time, making sure she did not miss anything. Satisfied, she turned back to Nima. "All right, Nima, I'll be going now. I have work to do, but I'll be seeing you soon. Goodbye, Dr. Jensen." Even though they were miles away, Godzilla's roar blared through the ensuing blizzard with such velocity, Macy felt as if he was right in front of her. Her attention was drawn away from the behemoth as the dust and snow settled around him. Ian was wiping the last of the tears from his face as he turned to Macy. It seemed the odds favored Godzilla this time, but the encounter gave us all we needed to defeat him. We also learned in the following weeks that Godzilla had been frequenting the Chernobyl disaster site. He would stay there for days at Ground Zero, feeding off the radiation. We also learned that the radiation levels had been dropping rapidly, lower than they had ever been. We soon realized that Godzilla would consume all the radiation from Chernobyl, and we estimated we only had 6 days left before it was all gone and we would miss our chance to finish him once and for all. Macy watched as the observation post blinked into a new location. She looked around to get her bearings, and her initial conclusion was that she was now in a massive hangar. She watched as men and women in coveralls meticulously checked equipment and sensors. Then her gaze fell on a launch pad with G.I.G.A.N suspended from cables, its whole front side completely blown away. She noticed its arms were not attached, but dangling from cables of their own to either side of the cyborg. Atomic breath was not the only weapon Godzilla had in its arsenal. This was caused by a massive burst of radiation that was so intense it melted away the flesh and most of the titanium that comprised G.I.G.A.N's interior section. However, the skeletal structure we coated with titanium as well was almost completely intact, allowing us a jumpstart on upgrades. Macy blinked again, now finding herself in front of an almost completely new monster. G.I.G.A.N was more metallic in his appearance than in his previous incarnation. It still retained the cycloptic eye it had from before. Serrated teeth still lined the inside of its beak, and the mandibles had been rebuilt to look more menacing. A truly alien creature to Earth, she thought to herself. She also noticed the arms had been reattached, but they were more sword-like than the sickles they once were. The dorsal fins had also been reconstructed and were now the same color red as his optical unit. She took note of what looked like a chainsaw that ran from the top of its chest down to the lower abdomen. G.I.G.A.N, now almost completely covered in metal armor plating, was more machine than creature. "Is that a buzzsaw?" Ian smiled with a look of pride on his face. "Do you like it? We added a few other weapon systems and reinforced its close combat weapons with a diamond coating to mitigate the damage caused by his radioactive blast. All they wanted was a weapon, and I gave him one, and so much more." Macy gave him a curious glance, showing him her more than obvious interest. All the organic material on the outside had all but been destroyed, but there was some that lingered on the inside. It had fused itself with the neural systems of the AI brain we had installed. It seemed like this gave the AI its own personality, truly making it a sentient creature. Of course, it had pre-programmed subroutines and protocols, but what the Russians didn't realize was that it was collecting its own data, and not just on Godzilla. It used the network to pull anything it could find off the internet to give it an edge. I monitored all of its activity as we drew closer to the confrontation. Macy observed Ian as he looked up in the direction of G.I.G.A.N's head. It seemed as if he was communicating with his cybernetic creation. The image of Ian looking at G.I.G.A.N as a father would look at their child was all Macy needed to see to realize just how off the rails Ian had gone while working on Project G.I.G.A.N. All they wanted was a weapon to kill Godzilla. But G.I.G.A.N was so much more than just a tool. It had a soul. It was truly alive. G.I.G.A.N cried out as it shifted in its restraints. Macy watched as Ian cautiously walked over to the launch pad with one of his arms raised. Personnel from the project all rushed to their closest exits while yelling at Ian to join them. She noticed a smile on his face as he began to speak. "This is probably the closest I'll ever get to being a father." I began to resent the Russians, though. G.I.G.A.N was more than just any weapon. It was a living creature, part instinct, part instruction. It was clear that it wanted freedom, but the Russians wouldn't have it. Ian lowered his hand as Gigan slowly stopped its erratic attempts at freeing itself. It stared directly at Macy's captive as he stared back. What just happened, Ian? What did you do to make him stop? Turns out Gigan imprinted on me. Maybe now you'll understand our connection. Ian returned to Macy as the giant cyborg lowered its head, the glow from its eye fading out as its power system shut down. Macy wondered how this was possible as she stared at Ian with a perplexed look. I know it's crazy. My best guess is that it managed to extract data on who its creator was. My only regret was that I couldn't take this opportunity to try to communicate with it. Our window to finish off Godzilla was quickly closing. My only hope was that Godzilla didn't have any other tricks up his sleeve. Macy blinked her glowing blue eyes only to find her location had changed to what seemed like another outpost when she opened them. There was a large monitor surrounded by several smaller monitors, with a few personnel tinkering with the controls on the consoles beneath in front of her. The wind was blowing and there was a slight snowfall. She took note of the encroaching clouds overhead, the sun's light breaking through but only just. On the monitors were images of Godzilla from different viewpoints. Ian's voice caught her attention even though she kept her eyes on the screens. With the improvements to Gigan's weapon systems and his increased intelligence, I calculated the probability of success at 0.9285. We did not have a viable answer to Godzilla's nuclear pulse other than the AI being able to predict it in time to minimize the danger, and this was just one of 3 outposts set up around Godzilla's position within the Chernobyl site. One to the west, one to the north, and one to the east. We're at the western outpost. He was resting in the courtyards. I guess he wasn't too bothered by our drones watching him. Macy could hear the sounds of the aircraft that carried Gigan off in the distance drawing ever closer. On the screens, she watched as Godzilla's eyes opened and looked around as the behemoth made its way to its feet. He roared at the ospreys carrying the alien abomination. You know, I had planned on helping Gigan after the battle. I could only imagine what its mind had discovered and processed. All the things it learned, all the questions it still had waiting to be heard. These people just wanted a weapon, but Gigan wanted freedom. He needed freedom. Isn't that the right of all living beings? Macy's attention was stolen by her captive as he gestured for her to come with him as he moved to the edge of the observation post. This is the best seat in the house. Gigan's cycloptic eye began to glow a menacing red as its systems came online. It raised its head to see Godzilla in the distance below him. It let out a cry as it began to twist and turn, trying to break free of its restraints. Godzilla bellowed out another roar as he began to charge at his cybernetically enhanced opponent as it fell after causing the aircraft carrying it to collide with one another. Godzilla, now at full speed, slammed into the alien construct just before it made landfall. The 2 giants fell to the ground, rolling over top one another before coming to a stop. Godzilla picked itself up and shook off the dust and debris that had collected itself on the god's hide. Gigan, still disoriented, started to make its way to its feet when it felt the rough skin and nails of Godzilla's forearms slamming down on its shoulders in a tight grip. Macy watched Godzilla's dorsal plates light up the clouds above in a brilliant shade of blue as the sun's light began to fade into night. Suddenly, the brilliant blue light flickered out as Godzilla cried out in pain. The behemoth looked down to see one of Gigan's sword-like scythe buried deep into the side of its lower abdomen. Suddenly, the beast felt another stabbing pain run through its shoulder on the opposite side. The ancient god cried out in pain as G.I.G.A.N used its body as leverage to pull itself onto its feet. Macy turned her attention to the monitors to get a better view. She could see Godzilla's blood flowing down G.I.G.A.N's enhanced weapons that were buried deep into its thick hide. Macy felt her stomach turn as G.I.G.A.N pulled Godzilla in closer to itself as the chainsaw-like weapon it now possessed switched on. Godzilla cried out in pain as the blade slashed and cut deeply into the giant's chest and stomach, blood splattering all over the cyborg's front, side, and beak. It let out a cry to match Godzilla's own. Macy's heart sank into her chest as Godzilla fell limp into the mechanical monster. The sun's light finally fading behind the storm clouds as the wind and snow began to pick up. Macy noticed a blinking light on the console below the screens. It was a miniature map of the battlefield showing the Chernobyl plant and the surrounding outposts. The icon indicating the easternmost post was flashing red. Macy glanced at Ian, who was shaking his head before her attention was taken back to the edge of what roofed the observation post. Something was in the clouds above the two titans. Macy glanced back at the monitors to see if the drones had picked up a better view when she noticed all of their screens were only showing static. That's when she heard the sound of something she had never heard before. It was majestic, yet fierce. G.I.G.A.N looked up and cried out, the clouds opening up by massive gusts of wind, as it was blinded by the intense light that was revealed. We had him beat. Victory was ours. But then it was stolen away from my precious G.I.G.A.N. My heart is breaking all over again, but I will enjoy watching what comes next.